This podcast is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute, providing resources to legal professionals and the law librarian community. For more information, go to pli.edu/librarian.
Hi, I'm Karen Osterly. Welcome to the Practicing Law Librarian podcast, presented by PLI's Legal Information Services Group. This podcast brings you conversations with and for the law librarian community. As a practicing law librarian myself, I've been working in legal information services for 34 years, currently with PLI's Library Relations Group. In this episode, Carla Wale, a law librarian and academic program director with multiple advanced degrees, including a JD, an MLS, an MBA, and a master's degree in education, talked with me about her love of school, her career path, the evolution of law libraries from print to electronic access, and the impact of COVID-19 on library services and remote instruction. We spoke about the integration and ethical use of AI in legal research and education, and the importance of law librarians engaging with broader professional issues and leveraging their legal training in complex operational and legal contexts to benefit their organizations and their patrons. Hope you will join us. Karen Osterly here, Practicing Law Librarian podcast, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. We have not, I don't think, actually met in person, but you spoke at one of our alumni conferences sometime in 2025. And so I wanted to reach out. And then today I was looking on AALL to see where else you'd worked. And I was like, holy cow, she has a bachelor's, she has a master's in library science, she has a JD, which you have to be a director of a law library at a law school. And then you have an MBA. So,
I do. And I have a master's of education.
Oh my God. Okay. That one's not on your, oh, you know what? They ran out of room. It's not on your AALL profile, but it is in your bio. So what order did you do those in? How did you get?
The order, initially it started in the typical order of academic law librarians, which is law school. And then that was my soft introduction to the profession. And then after law school, a few years after law school, graduate school at the information school at the University of Washington, the law librarianship program. I'm an alumna of that program, 2011. And then I subsequently entered the profession. And I'd always been interested in sort of the business side of pretty much everything. So the MBA was just to sort of flex that muscle. I knew early on that I was pretty sure I wanted to go into management, and I thought that would be quite useful, especially when you think about budgeting and all of those aspects. But really, it was more for personal fulfillment. And then once I finished the MBA, and I actually took a number of years to do that, right? Balancing, especially at the beginning of my career, really working hard because I was trying to get somewhere, trying to work up the ladder pretty rapidly.
Right.
So I took my time, the amount of time Johns Hopkins would allow me. And then it wasn't much long afterwards that I decided, coming out of COVID, Harvard's Graduate School of Education had to pivot their Master's of Education program online during COVID.
Right.
And Harvard University didn't have any online programs before then. They were very reticent. But the Graduate School of Education showed that it could be done, and it could be done well, even without what I think probably would have been the preferred, lead up time. And so they and one other program in another unit started the first two offerings of any online program other than like the professional or extension school.
Right.
And so I had been looking at the program, waiting to see if that would ever happen. And I got, an email from their marketing system, I'm sure. And I thought, yeah, let me join the inaugural cohort. And for me, that was really important because I'd been teaching for a long time and really learning myself, especially pedagogy and other aspects. But the Harvard program particularly focused a lot on access and inclusion and belonging and the learning sciences. And so for me, I am much better at structured learning, then I'll just read it on my own time myself. Like I
Right.
actually need structure and due dates.
Me too.
So for me, it was really just, I felt like it would fill kind of not the missing piece, but maybe it would fill the little bit that still needed to be filled in that missing piece. And so that's really how that all happened.
Wow. Well, that's quite the trick. You have more degrees than anybody else I know. So, so did you practice at all, or you went straight to librarian school?
I did not. There were a
Okay.
couple of years between law school and graduate school, law librarianship school for me, but I was handling some family issues at the time. So for all intents and purposes, I went straight through.
Okay.
I knew in law school very early on that I didn't want to litigate. And then I realized I didn't want to practice transactional law. And it was a pretty early introduction, my 2L year, being assigned as a research assistant for two professors who had the same law librarian liaison.
Okay.
And so that was really my introduction, even though I was an RA and one of them was working on a book about the tax code, which just not my jam. But I became very interested in what the law librarian, his name is Brian Huddleston, what he did. What is your job? And asking a lot of questions about that. And so even in my 2L year, I remember emailing Penny Hazelton, one of my predecessors, and who also oversaw and directed the UW's law librarianship program. And I remember talking to her, having a phone call my 2L year,
Right.
thinking, oh yeah, this actually is something I think I want to do.
Right.
I love the research aspect of this and the potential business aspects far more than litigation, transactional aspects of practicing law, or even legal writing, to be really candid. I like the journey of finding an answer. I mean, not that I do that a whole lot anymore in terms of research, but yeah, that's really how that happened.
And never looked back. Just continued to get degrees, to strengthen your work. That's pretty cool.
I mean, for me, it's, yes, there's professional growth in it, but it also has a lot to do with personal growth.
Okay. That's very cool. No, I studied philosophy undergrad because I knew I was going to grad school. I could do whatever. And it never crossed my mind to go to law school. I have an MBA also. And then years later, 25 years later, went and got my librarian degree. So you came to it pretty quickly. I didn't come to it for years. So that's
I was in my 40s I was in my 30s when I went to UW's law librarianship program, and in my 40s for the MBA and the master's in education. So It did take me a little while, but I also was a little bit older when I went to law school.
Okay. Interesting. And you mentioned a couple of names, and these are famous law librarians, Huddleston and Miss Hazelton, and Washington is really, really strong that way. Well, you know that the reputation of your school is very, very impressive.
I hope it
for
is
good reasons.
still and will be, because I now oversee that program.
Exactly. So that sort of talked about how you were interested in law librarianship and how you came into it. So how have you seen law libraries change since you've been working in them and using them before that?
I would say, in particular, if I think all the way back to me being in law school, and that, I started law school in 2003, I would say two main things. The first one is what I think most of us have experienced: moving away from just in case to just in time, but actually electronic just in time.
Okay.
That's sort of the added layer. And then that flows into the second thing I've noticed that has really changed is the emphasis on access to legal information over physical ownership. And there are a lot of pros to it. There are expectations from students. We know it's not feasible for everything, especially when you think about course books and information of that nature. So for me, it's really been watching that transition, just in time, just in case to just in time, but actually electronic just in time if possible. And then the flow into access over ownership. And I would say in recent years, the kind of downside of that. I've noticed that as a profession, my counterparts and other law librarians, throughout the profession, really coming to now understand and have to grapple with what that actually has meant beyond it just costs more money, right? Moving from ownership to access models, it actually removes really important limitations on the exclusive monopoly of copyright that libraries and archives have been able to avail themselves of, not just since the 1976 Copyright Act, but the first sale doctrine has been in place for a very long time. And then also, so how digital licensing and then the anti-circumvention of technology provisions in the Copyright Act, specifically the DMCA, like what has happened with that in terms of us becoming more aware that, that digital landscape and the laws and copyright around it, and then flowing into licensing, now that it's not ownership, that actually provides a potential avenue for our user data to be used elsewhere in ways that they most likely have not anticipated. And so now having to really think about all of the attendant issues to thinking about, electronic access over ownership, right? Because now it's about copyright analysis, data privacy analysis for us in the academy. What are the FERPA implications for student records, ADA, etc.?
Interesting. I think you're the first person that's brought that up when I've talked about that question or asked that question is user data, because they all have IDs, they have passwords and the companies know them, the suppliers.
Right.
I had not thought about that.
And one of the important things is thinking about using an enterprise license instead of like the law school, we're just getting a thing and just using it. No, use something that has an enterprise license, because hopefully your institution, whether you're a standalone law school or part of a larger university of college, your institution actually has the capability, hope, and obligation to negotiate those contracts, to actually put terms in them, data processing agreements, right? Like to make sure you're complying not only with state and federal law, but at UW, we have really stringent, we ask for a lot. We're very far ahead, but I think other schools are going to be where we've been for the last several years pretty soon. So yes, and to me, that is something that has been really interesting, that more and more we're starting to become aware of, like, oh, now we have to think about all these attendant issues related to digital collections.
Right, which is not new, but we're sort of newly conscious of it.
Yes, exactly.
And paying attention to it.
Right.
That is interesting. Now, when you came on board as director, was everything was it heavily electronic already, or did you do a lot of that migration from the print?
So there had already been a push forward with transitioning to electronic. And I also arrived at UW at a very precarious time for everyone. I arrived in May of 2020.
My
and then
Lord.
I joined the iSchool. This part is a little untraditional. I actually joined the iSchool in May of 2020 as the director of the law librarianship program, because the two positions, the associate dean and director of the law library in the law school, historically had also been the director of that graduate program, even when it was moved over to the information school.
Right.
For me, I took the newly formed separate job as the director of the graduate program because as an alumna, I really could see what was happening in the profession, but also with the program. And it was really important to me to revitalize it because it's a critical pipeline, in particular to the academic law librarianship market, but also markets that weren't being tapped, like legal tech. What could be better? UW's iSchool is also very tech progressive, right? So the foundation was there around, and so UW's also tech progressive. The foundation was there for that revitalization. But what ended up happening was pretty interesting. It was the beginning of the COVID, not the beginning, I guess, for Seattle, since this was the epicenter. I want to say that was maybe like February or March. So I was housed in the law school, my office. Traditionally, that's just how it has worked. But what ended up happening is that first year, although we were working remotely and I was in the office a little bit because I could be, the the former dean of the law school asked me if I would step in and be the interim and help with some transitions. And so that was the summer of 2021. And here we were still in kind of we're going to return back in person. Wait, maybe not, because there's a flare up. And so it was still very uncertain.
Right.
So for us here, I mean, fortunately, a lot of that work had already been done in emphasizing, fortunately, right? There's also a contra argument to that, but in emphasizing that access piece in electronic. And they didn't have to do it just when COVID hit. So the foundation had already been built. Yep. And then we were really focusing on a lot of, even beyond that, sort of what are we going to do while we are a closed building to our students. But I would say even after COVID and there was a return to the physical space and more certainty around the stability of post-pandemic, we really did lean into, okay, we actually need to have a balance of print versus electronic and make some updates to the collection development policy and to actually reflect the types of decisions that had been made even before me, but what we were going to do in terms of once I had stepped in. So we've done a lot of work on the collection side, especially in terms of continuing the work that had already started with electronic collections and that access over the physical ownership piece. But I would say most of the work we have done, and we had a restructure for the last several years, most of our work has really been on actually accurately conveying what we do in practice so that there are guidelines and places to refer to, and it's not us having to explain how we made a decision from memory. It's really been helpful in guiding us in all of our collection management group meetings, how to make decisions, what does that look like, what's our preference for one format over the other, et cetera.
Interesting. No, I'm just looking at my questions, and I had shared these with you, library tools you've created and your leadership roles and the issues you've worked on. But the issues you've worked on are not so much, changing this class format. It's more like the collection and teaching remotely and serving students when they can't come in or when they did start to come in. Process.
Yeah, and that is a salient observation. I think something that naturally flowed from that too became, well, what are the things that we had to do during COVID that, perhaps we wouldn't have done it that way so quickly. Right. But what are the things, even if it's just the idea of an activity we were doing or a change, what are the things that we think we should keep and continue, even if it's building out in a different way? So we did a lot of work the summer of 2022 in determining, we created a large sort of summer strategic plan that was just focused on executing. And a lot of it really was deciding, what are we going to keep? What are we going to change? What are we going to let go of? We have an opportunity here with COVID. Right. And frankly, because people have been out of the building for quite a while, right, we have an opportunity to actually maybe do things that perhaps you, law librarians, have wanted to do. So let's talk about it. What does this look like if we're just starting over, except we already have a collection in a building?
Right. Interesting. Now, do you guys still offer remote instruction?
So we do. Our consultations are remote. We actually offer remote instruction through, we revamped, I should say, and upgraded the classroom in the law library. It was like 2 small classrooms next door to each other. We made them one larger classroom, and then we outfitted it with high flex technology.
Right.
The idea with that is, even for programming for the JD program, or residential program, there are a lot of ABA requirements around distance education.
Right.
But there is a way for people to Zoom in. And the other way we can use that is, even if it's not through Zoom or Panopto, which generally at the university are used as integrated into Canvas, not standalone, Panopto in particular, what we can do is actually use our Zoom account, have students across the university, and we're building this out, actually Zoom into this specialized classroom. And there are cameras. They can see if anyone's in the audience or the instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a function of us really thinking about what our access policy was going to be after COVID. That has a lot of considerations, especially in kind of the world that we live in thinking about safety and security.
Right.
But how do we reach out to the rest of the university? It's not called a pre-law program, but the School of Public Policy, there basically is one. How do we reach out to them and provide some specialized training, especially because UW Libraries licensed Westlaw Campus Research? And we are the experts in what are the sources in there, not just navigating the platform, but here's how you use them, right?
Right.
Here's what their relationships to each other are. Here's where it is in Westlaw, but you actually need to understand what this source is and how it works with the interplay with all the other ones. So it's a different way of providing remote learning that we're working on. And then we actually use that classroom. And I would say this is more related to pipeline to our profession than it is serving patrons. So we actually do use that HighFlex classroom for several courses are cross-listed between the JD program and the graduate law librarianship program.
Oh, interesting.
And so we also launched, this is our third year of it's called a blended cohort, but having an online modality for the law librarianship program. And so for those students, they actually can remote in and the residential JD and then the residential law librarianship students, they're in the room, they can see each other, they can hear each other.
Right.
Class activities. And the idea with that is be able to provide the online students to the greatest degree possible the same experience. It's about quality control.
Right.
And so that actually really that remote aspect, and I'm not convinced, other than I am renowned for persevering. I think it made it a lot easier that COVID happened, right? That with some actual planning and thought, this can be really good. And the iSchool had already had for a very long time an online mode for the general MLIS program. The law librarianship program did not.
Okay.
So it really provided, even beyond the law library, but into that pipeline of the graduate program, again, a way to think about how do we use this really challenging time in history? How do we use it and make something positive out of it?
Exactly.
In terms of what can we do to change and think about the future in any kind of program? And the law librarians here are deeply involved with the graduate students in the law librarianship program as well. So there is a lot of thinking around that. And then we have remote interns. So a lot of that really came from the ability of how do we work remotely with our law students, but perhaps even with some of the online graduate law librarianship students and maybe even the public, right? In scheduling a public Zoom consultation.
Right.
If they have access.
No, you're right. It was life-changing, but a number of institutions like your own said, okay, let's take this opportunity. We never would have done this. We never would have chosen this, but let's not waste it. Let's figure out what we might want to change now that we have this opportunity.
I personally would have chosen to do it anyway and would have, but I think this made it a lot easier, right? Yep. The pitch I had to give was very different, right? In there's been a proof of concept. And even though it maybe didn't go the way any of us wanted it to,
right,
it can be done. So with some actual preparation, some expertise and planning, we do it the right way. This can be a really quality way to do things in both the graduate program and the law library, right? How do we do things in more of that hybrid HighFlex mode to really serve and support people in the ways they need to the greatest extent possible?
Right. And PLI did something on a much smaller scale. Our former head of HR, director of human resources, was really hands-on. She was here forever, Joan Sternberg. She was wonderful. And everybody had offices. And then we stopped coming in. I didn't get here till 22. But around that time, 22, she started thinking about it and talking to the executive group and, took half the third floor and took people's offices away. There's a new plan. If you were consistently in the office 2 days a week or more, you kept your office. And if you weren't, you're on a hotel in cube. And you can pair with somebody else who's in once a week. And so two of you, as long as you're in there 2 days a week, you could have an office. But took half the third floor and made meeting rooms because that's what people need now. You can't just sort of go into somebody's office or stop by and chat something. You have to plan things, but we have a big meeting room and there's 2 different ways to use it, with tables or with just seating, and lots of little rooms to do small group work. So same thing. It was, took some adjustment. Well, Lexis, we always had that. You may know I was 25 years with Matthew Bender and Lexis. And so we never had offices. We always worked from home. So this was like, oh, back to this for me. But anyway, so we did that on a much smaller scale, but using the opportunity and not wasting it. And like you said, you had a different pitch. Hopefully it was easier to
yes, get. I think it really was. Good. Both in terms of the iSchool, which they would have been on board anyway. They hired me specifically to do this, probably not as quickly as I did, but that was because when they hired me, COVID had not happened yet, right? It was like early in the academic year.
Right.
But it definitely made the conversations with the leadership in the law school much easier when I stepped in 2021, in particular around access and what does that look like, and what is serving the public look like at a public institution, which there are a lot of misconceptions about what we're required to do as a public institution and what we're not in terms of the public forum doctrine. But thinking about also resources. Okay, well, if we have a third of the staff that we had 10, 15 years ago, we cannot provide
do the same things
in the same way.
Right.
And so I had no doubt that COVID and the pivot that was required to really do everything online. And for us here, I would say really it was like almost a year, very lengthy amount of time, did make that a much easier conversation to have.
Well, along that path, because I think this is a continuation of that same path, artificial intelligence and resources. And now, as you know, it's embedded in all the major platforms.
Yes.
How are you guys handling that? How are you using that in research? How are you using that in teaching? How are you driving that?
It's a very interesting question. So the law librarians have, I don't even want to say we've positioned ourselves, because I am confident at most academic institutions, my colleagues have as well, we're the in-house generative AI experts. I think a lot of people forget that law librarians at a lot of schools brought in the first computers.
This is what we do.
Right? Exactly.
Right. We evaluate things, we test them, we use them, we judge them.
Librarians working with information and communication technology, this is not new. It's literally why it's called, ICT. So we really we're doing and working on several things. We facilitate the use of legal AI in conjunction with the university provided AI tools. So for example, Harvey AI, we are deep in that and rolling that out and been working with them all year after going through the licensing agreement process. But, how does that work in conjunction with UW built and rolled out this year a customized AI tool? And there are actually 4 different models. It's 2 Claude models where you can choose 2 ChatGPT models, in addition to the UW sources that they have fully integrated into that more closed model, as well as getting a license university-wide. This is very new for ChatGPT Edu, but then also thinking about that's a per user cost. So how do we balance? What's the policy? Where does that funding come from for that? Versus, hey, we have Copilot, which just like legal is in all of the Microsoft products now, right? And we are a Microsoft university, Seattle, not surprising.
Right, exactly.
I mean, this is William H. Gates Hall. So Kate L. Gates, but that's Bill's father. So yeah, it's already there, the facilitation and then the training of the faculty, students, even staff who ask for it, whether it's individual consultations or more broadly. So starting last year, and we've already been running it this year, providing targeted trainings for 1Ls specifically. And that is just a function of working with our faculty colleagues and sort of do we want to encourage them to use generative AI during their foundational 1L year where you actually need to learn the concepts, because generative AI still is not good at legal, not the public tools. It's just not, right?
Right.
In understanding the process of statutory amendments. How many times I get something I think, oh, that's not what the statute says now.
Right.
And so for them to be able to use it appropriately and ethically, they actually need to have foundational knowledge. Or how can they conduct due diligence? How can they vet the veracity of the response they're getting from their prompt?
Exactly.
So the 1L targeted is very different than what we do. We have a large one for the upper division students, and then we have a specific one targeted for the clinics, which the law librarians went to each clinic in the last 2 months. Then we're also actually working on creating a program track for the law students. Will be very robust offerings where self-selecting, they can come in, ancillary. Think of it as co-curricular versus curricular, because that's what it would be, where we'll be offering that, and we're rolling that out in the autumn. And it's all based around all these trainings, not just using AI. It's the ethical use of AI in law. This is about the ethical use of technology, right? Which is required under states' model rules of professional conduct.
Yep.
And so part of that is integrating that training that this isn't just about showing you how to use something. You actually have to use this responsibly and correctly.
Mm-hmm.
You have professional obligations to do so. And so
it's required.
Yeah. And so helping, really bring that to surface beyond what they have in their professional responsibility classes. And I think the other thing that is important is we all in the law library, we use it in our work.
Right.
But we all understand that don't include sensitive UW data, don't include personally identifiable information.
Right.
Do not include anything about a student. UW takes a very broad interpretation of what is a student record, basically everything.
Yep.
So yeah, I have some very specific things that I use it for that, yes, I can do myself. But so when I write something like a generic letter, whether it's a recommendation or something else, a template, it takes me forever. And it's because my OCD just takes over. But it's great. I can write it with UW Purple, and that just saved me 2 hours. Excellent. Yep. Because I already have previous ones.
You have pieces of it.
But I'm going through and I'm also changing and editing, right? To make sure, no, this is actually accurate and appropriate for what this particular use case is. And to the degree that it makes sense, using it in research as well. But we still are very much into especially the dual degree JD law librarians, because that's who conducts the research and also in teaching. This is really, and we have several practitioners too who have practiced law, I should say. But this is really where the expertise is understanding that analysis. But using generative AI as a supplemental tool, right? It shouldn't supplant; it should supplement, and that's really the path we've taken. And frankly, several of us use it to help us in class. I can write an extraordinary rubric with ChatGPT, Edu's help. And that's the kind of stuff that really is just time consuming, but important, but it doesn't require a lot of thinking for those of us who already understand what we're doing, right? We have the experience to know that this is a good rubric or this is not a good rubric or this aspect of it isn't.
Right.
So we're using it in teaching too. And at the law school, it's really, our policy is it's up to the instructor to either permit it permit its use or explicitly prohibit it. And if they prohibit it, it's a honor code violation.
Okay. So let me step aside for a minute because we are with PLI, Luke and I. How have you used PLI at your various places? Because you were at Loyola, you were at Johns Hopkins, you've been at UW for much of your career.
When I was at Temple is when we licensed Y, and the way we really used it, and I was in mid-management there. So I was still actually overseeing the research deliverables. And the way we opted to use it, which we thought made a lot of sense, and what I really appreciated about it being so practitioner focused, right? We focused on the clinics, especially the clinicians, and then also in how to use this for students in like the practical sense, supplementing things like Pennsylvania. It may not be a mom and pop publisher anymore. I don't know. I haven't been there in a while. But they still had an independent publisher really writing excellent desk books for practitioners. And so for us, especially in teaching Pennsylvania legal research, which I created and taught for the years I was there, how do we integrate both those independent, and a lot of them were still only in print, except you're saying this is the preeminent desk book on this area in this state.
Mm-hmm.
But then how to supplement that with PLI, in particular, the collections, in thinking about sort of the much more practitioner focused areas versus like black letter law, right? Doctrinal, the things that you would get from a course book. So for us, it was really thinking, I guess the way to sum that up is the experiential learning component,
mm-hmm.
but also in particular helping when we get email requests from the public. It's sort of like, I need a straightforward explanation of something or what something is. And then to the degree that we could within the licensing,
right,
point them to something.
Right. Now, going back to that, I'm not really clear if you were talking about that at Temple or if you're talking about that at UW, answering questions from the public.
Temple. And Temple was a closed building. So it would be email.
Okay. All right. But here where you are, UW, you're open obviously to students and faculty, alumni, the bench and the bar and the public.
Anyone who's not a current UW student, UW Law, I should say, student, faculty member, or staff, or current UW wide faculty member, they actually have to make a public appointment.
Okay. So you're accessible, but not walk-in?
No.
By appointment?
Yes.
And do you get much, I don't know what to call it, traffic? Do you get many patrons come in that way?
We don't. We have specified blocks of times and days where those appointments occur, and that's just a function, again, making sure that we can staff people to help them, the law librarians in particular, as well as librarians to facilitate access, because there's not a straight way to get into the law library. You have to go through many doors. So, and the full building is more secure. So I would say that our experience has been, at least since I've been here post-pandemic, we don't get many practitioners. We do have a fair number. Those appointments are often booked up for those it's like 2 days a week. I have a large chunk of hours. They're usually full, but it tends to be the same people.
Okay.
So we have some, frequent patrons, public patrons who come in that we help, but it's been interesting because it's not really practitioners. And that also might be a function of two things. And it's the location of where we are. But I think mostly it's because we're fortunate in the city of Seattle that downtown and the courthouse is the King County Law Library, and their entire mission. I mean, yes, members can, attorneys, local attorneys can join and be members, but really they are focused on serving the public, and they have, really robust services in terms of helping how we think of usual public patrons.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that really affects what the public usage of our law library looks like, because
they're going to go there. Yeah, they're going to go there first.
Right? They have the kinds of things. They have a lot of form book type, instructional things that we just don't have. And we do work with them and reach out with them. And sometimes, in particular, if we get a question and we don't have a resource that would answer that question, we'll look and see if King County has it. And then we'll talk to them, or we will then direct that person to King County. It's really about, and they'll do the same if it's an academic source. So we do try to, work with each other collaboratively. And it's the same with the Washington State Law Library too. We try to be collaborative in terms of collecting Washington State materials that aren't primary law. We want to make sure one of us has. Yeah.
Right. Doesn't have to be all three or even two of you, but somebody needs to hold it.
And so it's interesting because it is not practitioners in the way I think that maybe some places are.
Right. Interesting. So we were talking about AI and that path, and you guys use it, very heavily. You're clearly invested in that and use that. What do you see? Because it's getting stronger, it's getting better. It wasn't great for law for a long time, but late last year it made these huge jumps because of the coding. How do you see that playing out? What do you see as the future of AI in law schools and in library schools and in law libraries?
I have a lot of opinions, and they don't necessarily all agree with each other. I think first and foremost, it's a mistake to ignore it. And I would like to think that no law schools are ignoring it, but I know that's not the case. And sometimes that's really just comes down to a matter of resources. And that's going to be a different scenario and answer for every law school. But I think to the extent that an institution can thoughtfully integrate and use it, they should. I don't think generative AI is going to replace lawyers anytime soon. I think lawyers who don't use generative AI are going to be replaced by lawyers who do. I think that's what that looks like. I don't want to pretend like living in the utopia of it's just going to get rid of doc review and the menial task. I'm not. But frankly, is it the worst thing that it does get rid of those? Yeah, no one needs to be paying a lawyer $25 an hour for that. And I'm thinking about what it looked like for the Great Recession for a lot of people. And that's what they were relegated to doing because that's the only work they could find. Right. But, in terms of generative AI being, this inevitable, massive, revolutionary, going to change all of society, that some are predicting, but not all, and depends on which expert in which area.
Right.
I'm just not quite convinced yet. For me, I just personally see too many indicators of uncertainty for me to be comfortable or to be uncomfortable with the feeling that, yes, this is really going to create a massive upheaval. Right. AI currently plays an outsized role in, some people would say, propping up the current U.S. economy. Yet many experts predict there's going to be a bubble break. So what happens then if that were to occur? That's a massive upheaval, but not the type we're talking about. Right.
Right.
And then the environmental impacts of data centers. And now that local residents are starting to pay attention and fight back, because whether it's thinking about the environmental impact or the operational costs that are being passed on to those local residents.
Right.
I read an article earlier this week, I think in the Atlantic, and it was talking about, I won't say which company, has 7 of 23 planned data centers running in a certain state. I won't say which one, but it was quite mind-blowing because the article said that by the time all 23 of these facilities in this data center
are online.
Yeah, by the time they're online, they will consume the equivalent power per day of 2 Atlantas. And so for me, that's also a question of sustainability. So that's where I have pause, because for me, it's sort of like, do we even have enough materials, energy, et cetera, to even sustain what AI would require for this massive upheaval.
Right. Even just physically,
Yeah.
even just,
Yeah. I have questions, Karen. I have many. But again, I do think, as I mentioned earlier, it's a really important, if nothing else, it's an important innovation in supplementing practitioners. And it can be, if used appropriately, quite a freeing supplemental tool in
Right.
sort of, we should be using our minds, our human experience, and our human judgment,
Right.
especially in areas. I teach in copyright, so I'm always stuck in copyright, where fair use, for example, is a case-by-case, fact-specific inquiry. Okay,
Right.
well, it's a case-by-case, fact-specific inquiry. It's all unique, right? That could be the argument. And so for me, that still requires human judgment for
Right.
lawyers to advocate and judges to decide. But yeah, it would be a fool's errand for, in particular, law schools, or I think anyone, to put their head in the sand. I mean, I think the
Right.
reality too is students are using it. So
Right.
would you rather them use the publicly available tools and perhaps without any regard for the type of information they're inputting into
Right.
those tools and what happens to that information?
Exactly.
Or is it better for us to integrate something that is in more of a closed system, that we have contracted and had really thoughtful discussions about privacy and have some control over that data processing, and then provide the training about, this is how you should use it. This is what it's
Right.
good for. This is what it's not good for. Or
Right.
this could be an ethical dilemma. Don't do it.
And these are the guidelines, and you need to follow
Yes.
these if you're going to use our resources.
Again,
Those kind of things.
right. Firms want practice-ready graduates, and this is now going to be an even more important part of that.
Yep. True. This has been so interesting. And is there anything else that you would like to say, to share with us on this topic or any other?
I mean, I think to the same, in the same vein, not just law schools, I think it applies to law librarians too. I am not concerned, there's a caveat, about us being replaced.
Mhm.
I think for the places that think that's a great idea without actually putting some thought into it and understanding the vital role that we play, I think they will regret that. But it is important that we really use it and use it in ways that make sense. But I don't think it replaces us. Again, it's that human judgment and experience that's important. And for me, I don't know, I think one of the questions you had sent me ahead of time that I spent a lot of time thinking about this morning was, what are the most important
Learnings.
that I would share with fellow law librarians?
Yes.
Because it's not enough to simply persevere and hope for the best. And I apply that to everything. We must engage with the profession and the issues affecting us as a profession. I know none of us have time to do this work, but we have to.
We need to.
It's imperative that we all really, at some point, I realize when you're at the very beginning of your career, you're thinking on the micro level, you. But I really think it's important that we as a profession widely start thinking on a macro level, and that's where our focus and our engagement and, even things like public presentations, writing, we really need to be focusing on that macro level. And this is for a lot of reasons, not just AI. And then, the other question I spent a lot of time thinking about, like when you asked, what do I wish I'd known when I began my career?
Right.
I wish I had known how important my legal training would actually be, especially for this job. In case it wasn't clear, in a given day, most days, I will deal with issues related to contract law, licensing, copyright, data privacy, freedom of speech, the public forum doctrine, FERPA, the ADA, collective employment law in terms of collective bargaining, state and federal, parsing proposed legislation that might affect operations or, budgeting. And without the legal part of the duality of my job, the JD and the MLIS, I just don't think I could really do this job that well. It's interesting because, yes, using that in terms of legal research early in my frontline jobs and early in my career, my frontline positions and teaching, it was important. But now it's not just talking about it and then
You're doing it.
about it. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And so
Right.
both are important, but frankly, I wish I had known. Maybe I listen, law school was a journey for everyone. I did fine, don't get me wrong, but perhaps I would have been glued to my contracts professor, for example. Right. I think that's the thing, that it's not that it's been surprising. I just didn't really think about it. Right. And I think too, because we're just so focused, understandably, especially those of us who go for the JD before the MLIS.
Right.
Sort of last focus you have is on the information side, but then it's like comes full circle.
Right.
So yeah, that's it. I have a lot of things to say.
Okay. Well, that is perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Practicing Law Librarian, part of PLI's Ever Current podcast. Be sure to subscribe and listen to our latest episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. And to learn more about the Practicing Law Institute, please visit pli.edu. To learn more about PLI Plus, which provides electronic access to the full collection of PLI Press publications, and schedule a demo with a member of our team, please visit pli.edu/plus. Please note that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast represent those of the individuals being interviewed and not necessarily those of PLI.